New York City is one of the most expensive cities to live in the world. And being in New York City, you can spend a lot of things on really dumb things. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about things I stopped buying while living in New York City after living in New York for over a year. Hey you guys, if you're new to our channel, my name is Joy, and on this channel, we help millennials build wealth so they can live life on their terms in New York. If you are interested on money tips while living in New York City, then definitely consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. Now, let's get into the first thing that I'm going to stop buying. The number one thing that I have stopped spending money on is utilities like heater, water, and trash. So ever since moving into large cities like San Francisco and New York, I no longer have to pay for a electric heater because most of the buildings that I live in or that are offered in this area are pre-war buildings, meaning that they were built before the World War. So most of those buildings have central heat inside of them, and they blast out a bunch of heat from the basement using a steam process. This actually keeps the apartment super warm, and I don't have to waste money spending on an electric heater, which if you lived on the West Coast, most of the buildings in the newer buildings on the west side of the country are using electric heaters, which can be really expensive. When I was in college, my first year living out of the dorms, my roommate and I accidentally left the heater on, and we didn't know that the bill was going to be really high, and it came out to be super expensive. And when you're in college living off ramen, like, that's just not a vibe. So ever since living in New York City, I don't pay for a heating bill. I also don't pay for water, and I also don't pay for trash. Whereas when I was living in the suburbs outside of the city, I was paying for water and trash as part of my utilities when I was renting a house. The second thing that I stopped buying, especially in this past year, if you guys are watching this, it's 2021, so we're still in the rough part. I stopped buying a subway pass. I used to get a weekly subway pass. So in New York City, for the subway, what you can do is you can spend on your subway pass for time, or you can spend it per ride. And I usually did time because I was commuting to work, so I would buy a weekly pass that was unlimited, and I was able to go as many times as I wanted. Luckily, at some point my employer was covering the subway pass for me, but the job that I last had before the one I have now did not cover the commuting fees, and that definitely added up. I have chosen not to ride the subway for the past few months. One, because of just health safety measures. I just don't really want to be like stuck in like a little like ventilated cart with people that I don't know. And a lot of the people in there right now are people that don't have a home, so they usually don't have access to proper hygiene. Also, I've been watching on the local news that there's been more like crime on the subway, people getting pushed into the subway tracks. So I tend to avoid the subway people during the winter time, especially during the winter time. That's where they like crawl to get warm. I also stopped buying Uber and Lyft rides, not because I'm not feeling safe in those cars, because they do have a sliding sheet in between the cars, but it's more of like I just feel like it's a waste of money, especially because right now you can't do the ride sharing. It's like a private car, so they're typically more expensive. I will basically like city bike places, or I'll walk places. I don't really leave my neighborhood like in a 5-mile radius, and if I do, I usually walk. Okay, third thing that I stopped paying for in New York City this year is a doorman. So if you guys are new to how the housing process works in New York City, some apartments are either called a doorman building or a walk-up. So it's very literal, like walk-up means you walk up and there's no doorman service. When you have a doorman at the end of the year around the holiday times, it's actually proper etiquette for you to tip everyone that works in your building. That includes all the doorman and the maintenance team, etc., and your super. And that can cost a lot of money. It can cost a couple $100s. I did not know that this was like a etiquette thing in New York City until I moved here. And my roommate at the time, who is really bad with money, was like, yeah, you have to pay me for the end of year bonus for the doorman, and she didn't put that in the leasing agreement. So luckily I was able to get out of paying that, because honestly I think it's kind of overrated. Like, your landlord should be paying them. Like, why should I be paying it? Maybe that's like a West Coast thing. Comment below if you think that's ridiculous. I think it is. I live in a walk-up right now, and yes, I kind of do miss like the luxury of having a doorman and knowing that someone's there and someone to talk to and to walk in and out. But my last doorman was only a part-time doorman. He was only there like on the weekdays from 5 until the evening, and then on the weekends, but like he wasn't there like for the most part of the time. So I just like really didn't see the point in having one, but maybe that will change. We'll see. Another thing that I stopped paying for in New York City is a broker's fee. In fact, I've never paid for a broker's fee living in New York City. If you guys are thinking about moving to New York and you're not familiar with the process, in New York City, getting an apartment is kind of like getting a house, because you have to work with an agent, and the agent basically has a commission fee that you have to pay them to work with them, called a broker's fee. And the broker's fee can be anywhere from like 1 to 2 months rent. They basically will give you a percentage of what the total lease would be, but it really comes down to like 1 to 2 months rent, and then you have to pay for the deposit, which is like 1 to 2 months rent. And last year around this time, they actually passed a law saying that broker's fees weren't something that would be like legal anymore, but there's still some broker's fee. Luckily, I've been able to like avoid the entire broker's fee process by just finding apartment deals on Craigslist. In fact, I have a really good video that talks about how to find cheap rent in New York City. So I'll put the card over here so you guys can check it out. And that should give you some tips on how you can house hack and find really good prices living in the city. Okay. Now let's push through some of these. The next thing that I'm gonna stop buying is smoothies and expensive salads. So when I was living in New York City and I was working all the time, I would go to Juice Press and buy like an $8 to $12 protein smoothie, or I would go to Sweet Green and Dig In and buy a $15 meal. There's a lot of on the go, like grab and go lunch meals for people working, and now that I work from home, that's not something that I buy anymore. And even if I'm like out and just worked out, I try not to lean to buying that. One thing I did invest in this year is a brand new NutriBullet. The last NutriBullet that I had lasted me over 5 years, but the blades started getting kind of dull, and I was thinking about getting the other option, which would have been a Vitamix, but honestly, the Vitamix is so huge and clunky, and like the blender is just huge and inconvenient, and my parents have it in the suburbs, but I think for the city it just doesn't really make sense. So I got a NutriBullet that has 1,400 watts, and it's basically just as powerful as a Vitamix, and it can do everything that I would want, like making soups, nut butters, smoothies, etc. I freaking love it. So definitely check out NutriBullet instead of Vitamix. Next thing that I'm also going to stop buying is Netflix. So I just found out that my Netflix membership is included in a T-Mobile plan, and I'm on my family plan for T-Mobile because it's just cheaper when we all chip in on the family plan. So I was really mad that my dad didn't tell me that. So I'm actually going to be canceling out my Netflix membership this month and just going to use the Netflix family username that we have, because that's like getting pretty expensive these days. I think they're like $10 a month. I don't know. Like, do you guys have the premium on Netflix? Let me know in the comments. I also stopped paying for internet. I feel like this video is like, how can I not pay any utilities or expenses? But our company just let us know at the end of last month that because we're still going to be work from home for the most part of this year, that they're going to be switching around the employee benefits. It doesn't really make sense to have like commuter benefits or like certain like workout benefits if we can't have access to that. So they basically increased our work from home budget, and one of the benefits with that is that we can expense our internet, and we're also given a $150 like work from home expense budget. So I have really fast internet because I stream everything and I do YouTube. So that's also one thing that I'm not going to be paying for anymore in 2021, which was so cool. If you guys are looking for a job in New York, I would definitely check out working for tech jobs, especially startups that have a lot of benefits when it comes to working from home, because it definitely adds up. Okay, next thing on the list is I'm gonna stop paying for museum tickets. Not that I've been like a museum person goer or like this like art, like, I don't know, person. I actually have never been to a museum yet in New York City. I was supposed to go to the Met last weekend, but for some reason, like, my friend and I couldn't go. Anyways, I found out that if you get a New York City ID, which is for free, you just sign up online and go in and show like your information. You can actually get access to a lot of free places in New York City, one of them being museums like the Met Museum and also the Chelsea Pier. So that is one thing that I'm not paying for. I know like going to the Met Museum, a ticket can be $15. So that's really awesome. And I basically get to access a bunch of free things in New York City for free. So I would definitely check that out as well. Okay, 8th thing that I'm going to stop spending this year living in New York City is delivery apps. On my phone, I literally have like 5 food delivery apps, which in the beginning of quarantine, I thought was a really great thing because I was like, I'm supporting small business owners in the recession and all this different thing. But I started realizing that that was making my waistline really big, and I went on the scale for the first time last week because it's like the new year, whatever. And it was really bad. Like, I definitely need to like lose a lot of weight. So one of the things I've decided is I'm going to make all my meals if I can and force myself to eat my groceries in my apartment. If I am going to eat out, I'm only going to eat out with my friends, because one of my New Year's resolutions is to work on my personal relationships. I think last year I was like so consumed with growing this YouTube channel and like myself and working on myself that I neglected a lot of my friendships. So I'm going to force myself to like schedule one social outing a week. I know it's weird that I have to like schedule that, but it's one thing that I'm going to do, and I'm going to force myself to not eat out unless I'm with my friends. And I've also deleted the food delivery apps from my phone, so I'm not going to be like motivated to want to order from them at all. Then the 9th thing that I'm going to stop buying are designer purses. In one of my videos about mistakes that I bought in my 20s, I mentioned that one of the things was designer clothes. So when I first started in sales and I was making big commission checks, I was so excited. I would like buy like designer shoes and purses, and they were like so dumb, because now looking back, like, I wish I didn't buy that, and I wish I just bought more plane tickets. But I think when you're young, especially when your parents tell you you can't buy XYZ, it makes you want to spend on those items more often. So moving forward, I'm not going to buy any new purses. And if I do buy a designer purse, it's going to be through a consignment shop or like a secondhand used website like The Real Real, or I don't know, like some other consignment shops in New York City, because it's just kind of a waste of money and I'm not going anywhere. Then the last 2 things, the second to last thing is I'm going to stop buying cleaning supplies. I used to buy Swiffer wipes all the time with my roommate, one because she mostly wanted to do that, but it's really bad for the environment and you just toss it away and it's a waste. So right now I have this like second type of company style Swiffer, and I buy reusable Swiffer wipes. They're not Swiffer wipes, but they're like mop wipes, and you can throw them in the washer and then use them again. So that's what I'm going to do to save on cleaning supplies. I'm also going to try to buy cleaning supplies that's like all multi-purpose, so then you're not using one for the other. And then the last thing that I'm definitely not spending on in New York City anymore is going out. I went out a lot when I first moved here, and I was out really late at night. That wasn't good for my health, but you know, when you move here, you're super excited to try to stay and do yes for everything, and that was really bad for my health. It was also really bad for my waistline and also bad for my bank account. So overall bad for everything. And now that we can't go out like to bars and stuff late at night, that actually gives me more money to spend on things like buying equipment for YouTube or like working on, I don't know, maybe a podcast or something. So I'm excited to take that money and reinvest it into myself instead of like drinking away or eating it away or partying it away. Let me know if any of these things are things that you're thinking about giving up. And if you're living in New York City, I would love to hear some things that you're not spending anymore. Let me know in the comments. And if you've watched until the end and you're still here, thank you so much. If you aren't part of the community yet, we post videos every week, so definitely subscribe and hit the notification bell, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!